Good morning, everybody. For those of you that are in Europe, good afternoon. I want to thank everyone for attending this webinar today. We received a tremendous response to this webinar, and we want to give everyone some time to log in as we're expecting a fairly large crowd. While we wait for everyone to join, I'm just going to do a quick introduction about myself. I know that looking at the attendee list, I see that I've done demos and at least most of you have attended some of my webinars. My name is Federico Peña and I'm the president and founder of IT-ROI Solutions. Now I've been working in the ITSM space, so that's basically service management, software configuration management, and project portfolio management for the last 15 years as a consultant. And the last few years, I've started to focus my career a lot on BI, business intelligence, and big data, as this seems to be the new trend going forward in IT. Before we start, I want to encourage everyone to use the question and answer box located in the right-hand side of your screen. Please feel free to type the questions or any questions that you might have throughout the webinar. Remember, the more you ask, the more you're going to get out of the webinar. So please don't hesitate to ask any questions as I go through the webinar. I'm going to spend a little bit of time throughout the webinar to make sure that I answer all of the questions. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick introduction about my company, which is IT-ROI Solutions. We started off as an enterprise consulting firm in 2009, and our mission was to deliver consulting services. As the years went, though, our focus really changed from providing services to figuring out how we could minimize services. And we did this by trying to automate the implementation process. We noticed that one of the biggest costs that organizations were initially facing, specifically around PPM and SCM, were the cost of integrating. So we started our software organization by building what we call the IB, or short for the integration bridge. And this tool was designed to automate the building of integrations, basically by automating the business rules of an ETL. Now the IB is the cornerstone to most of the business intelligence solutions that we assist clients with. So it played a big part in what we're doing today as far as what we're going to be presenting. In our series of webinars, we usually do webinars maybe once a month or so. We occasionally do some educational webinars regarding topics of interest to our clients. One of the most common topics that we've come across the last year is around business intelligence, specifically reporting around PM or PPM data and what this means to organizations. Although BI is extremely powerful, we find that most organizations struggle with the topic. And I want to take some time to share what we found to be the most common problems that organizations face around business intelligence and what they're doing to try and resolve these issues. So for that, the topics today are going to be, obviously everyone is using business intelligence. Those that are not using business intelligence, they're thinking about using business intelligence or trying to get into business intelligence. Why companies get into business intelligence. So we're going to cover the reasons the cost benefit analysis of utilizing BI, right? And we're going to get into some BI success rates, right? So how many companies are successful in their implementation and with what they're doing, right? Then we did quite a bit of research with a lot of organizations to figure out why a lot of organizations are failing with their analytics or their business intelligence. And then the last couple of slides, we're just going to cover on a few pointers from us or from me on what we found and what we can do to help your organization avoid a lot of the pitfalls or how to get through the hurdles of business intelligence. Since BI or business intelligence along, and whenever I talk about BI, I want to say, I want to include the word big data, because big data is now a big part of business intelligence, right? As we move into social networking and that kind of thing, unstructured data seems to be more part of the norm or a new trend, right? So we as consulting firms have received a high level of demand for these services around these topics, but most organizations are really unclear of the needs, right? Everyone knows that they need to report on something, but when you get to the nitty-gritty on getting requirements, a lot of people are having difficulty understanding what their issues are. Okay? So I'm going to share some facts about what other organizations are doing so you can see where you stand in comparison to other large companies across and around the world, right? So, for example, according to The Economist, over 70% of CEOs consider BI and big data vital to strategic decision making, right? This means that there's a large focus from executive management to IT departments to resolve this issue, right? And then, if you get into something like Forbes, right, they say 83% of enterprise leaders worldwide consider BI and big data the next competitive edge. And this is causing BI implementation growth to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 50% annually. We can get into topics like presidential elections, which are also defined by big data and analytics. And really, it has become the new industry standard to be able to build models that might help predict specific outcomes in the future. So why do organizations get into BI? Well, I think the first reason is that there's a misconception on higher management on the effort required to do the implementation correctly, right? And when I say that there's a misconception, I think a lot of people think it's relatively straightforward or not a monstrous project to get involved on a large business intelligence project, right? But this is really driven by a need to stay competitive, right? The bottom line is organizations have to do analytics on all their data to stay competitive, right? It's no secret that BI done well is going to be beneficial to the organization. The struggle lies around doing it well so it's cost effective, right? I'm going to cover some use cases that we've seen some of the savings around organizations we were able to achieve utilizing BI, right? A good example is UPS, right? UPS implemented business intelligence and analytics around big data around 2012, right? And over 6 years, right, they were able to save somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 million gallons of gas and 98 million man minutes just finding inconsistencies in their deliveries, right? Why? Because they were able to find locations where they were being inefficient, right? So this turns into millions of dollars per year in savings, right? Another example is Tesco, right? For those of you that are in North America, it's like the European Amazon, right? But they were able to trim like $100 million per year just by finding flaws in their inventory and packing systems, right? So I can keep going with all these use cases, right? The thing is, it's important that it be done correctly. Otherwise, most BI implementations are going to fail, right? So only 7% of executives say that the reports can accommodate their organization's growing volume, right? And 9% of CEOs believe the reports present a single version of the truth. And 74% of business leaders still get their data from multiple unconnected sources, right? So I'd like to ask all of you that are on this webinar, and if you can just type something in the question box, right? How they think their organization is doing with their global BI implementation. Or even the focus, I know that most people that are on this call are PPM focused or PPM centric, right? How do you think your BI implementation is going? Are you utilizing Jaspersoft or Power BI, Tableau, that kind of thing? Are you doing data extracts directly from the database, right? And how do you think it's doing? How do you think your reports are measuring up? Do you think your organization is getting a large benefit from the investment that you're putting into your reporting solution, right? Since globally there's such a push around BI, right? dedicated several resources for the last 6 months around finding the main issues and main success cases around BI implementations. Right? We focus the investigation and research around CEOs, IT consulting organizations, universities, and industry experts. We analyzed 25 qualified sources around the most common sources of why organizations fail with their BI implementation. And we're going to share with you the most common causes for unsuccessful BI rollouts, right? And these were the results. First thing we compare is the opinion of the industry experts along with executive opinions, right? And generally speaking, both cases are very similar. In both examples, we cover over 75% of the causes reported by our research, right? One of our conclusions is that in most scenarios, organizations do not have a clear view on what they want, which causes poor requirements to be developed and therefore poor results, or the results are skewed. This, of course, is the hardest roadblock to surpass since it's very difficult to change corporate culture. And this requires, very powerful internal sponsorship to be able to overcome this problem, right? Once you get across the first problem, then the other problems are basically around data, right? Once the people and the goals and the requirements are overcome, the largest problem around BI really revolves around data, right? And data is really broken into three different components around BI. The first is data quantity, right? The big misconception is that BI solutions should have hundreds of dashboards, views with drill down capabilities, but what we found is this creates an information overload, making the reporting platform inefficient and difficult to decipher. So your user adoption really drops, right? And you're going to hear me say this sentence quite a bit, right? But when it comes to BI, right, less is more. The second is data quality, right? Now I have a personal interest in this particular topic because it's something that I've tried to assist companies with, which is the data, the accuracy of the data, right? This usually comes back to people since they're the ones that enter the data. Most companies struggle with the accuracy of the data across all or most of their platforms, right? Most organizations agree that their data accuracy is around 70%, right? This means that irrelevant of your BI solution and implementation, you start off with a 30% error margin on the decisions that you're going to make. Right? And the last one is around BI integrations, right? And in this case here, I tend to agree more with the CEOs in the sense that I think BI integrations, from what we've seen in the past, is definitely a large component of why BI implementations are flawed. And mainly it is around the fact that data is duplicated, right? You integrate from one system to another, right? From a financial system, let's say SAP to CAPPM. And at the end of the day, once you integrate that data, you're pulling feeds from either or both systems. The problem is only one of the two systems is your system of record, right? So it's the one that contains the truth, right? And this can cause very heavy data inconsistencies due to how stale your data is, right? When we talk about accuracy as well, right, around integrations, that really just is around timeliness. So how old is your data compared to your transactional database, right? And obviously, since we built our company around integrations, right, this is one of the specific topics that we try to minimize risk on, or we try to emphasize with organizations that we can help resolve. So now that we understand where the main issues lie around most BI implementations, the question is, how can How can we help, or how can we make the correct decisions so your organization doesn't make the same mistakes that most organizations make? Right? So as I mentioned on the previous slide, there's 4 common errors and problems, and the most common and difficult to fix is internal politics and corporate culture. Right? The others are specific to best practices around data quality inside of, I'm going to call it your data warehouse, because that's really going to be your data storage location for your BI, right? And this is where we're going to be focusing on the next few slides on, right? So we're going to try and provide some tips and tricks on how to minimize risk when building out your BI infrastructure. All right. So the successful BI implementation, right? All in one place, right? People don't like to navigate back and forth from one tool to another or from screen to screen, right? So you want to set the business goals with the information dashboards, right? What does that mean? You want to make sure that your dashboards are congruent in one page, right? Information quantity, avoid the information overload with a friendly tool, right? And information quality, avoid duplication of information, right? Don't have, from one screen to another, very similar, unrelated data, right? So let's talk about the solution, right? So since we found that there are really 4 main things to keep in mind when building your business intelligence reports, so what are the steps that we need to perform to make sure that we don't have any problems, right? So the first one is failing to set your business and implementation team goals, right? So you concentrate on vital information, align objectives, prioritize information, provide access, right? So you want to remember to keep your vital information up front, right? Secondary information is on other screens, right? So you want to make sure that you keep the focus of the people on the main screen. Keep your screens relevant and the information to the information presented, right? Do not mix information that's not related, right? A very specific case, you don't want to mix project information with incidents that are not related, right? That kind of thing. You want to keep projects and resource data separate, right? If using graphs, maintain color schemes throughout your business intelligence, right? Remember key information up top, right? Not as relevant information at the bottom, right? So whenever you open the page, you want to see the most important information up at the top, up front, okay? Everything else, right, people will scroll to at the bottom, okay? Ensure your security model with access, right? Whenever you're granting the correct access to people, make sure that within inside of your data warehouse, you have a security component that limits the data that and people can see, right? This is important so you don't have to build lots of different reports. You want to build one report that's useful for everybody, right? For each component or each goal or each part of the organization, right? And you keep security to segregate the data that people visualize or do not visualize, right? This is going to help your user adoption for reporting. Okay? Information overload. Right? This is, in my opinion, the most critical, the most common, the error that I see the most with inside of organizations, right? You want to centralize the information, identify the metrics, right? And ensure you integrate only the necessary data from different tool sets, right? So one of the key things that that one must always keep in mind is that not all information is vital for decision making, right? And most organizations tend to overload their dashboards, creating an information overload, right? Keep the dashboard simple and easy to use. Drill down to a maximum of 2 levels. trust the sources. Now, I always, this obviously comes down to data accuracy, right? That's why, for those of you that have attended, I've done quite a few webinars actually on data accuracy and maintaining data accuracy, because one of the largest issues that we find around BI is specific to this topic. And a lot of the time it has to do with the end user interface for that particular tool set makes it complicated or tedious to add large amounts of data. Therefore, clients tend to, let's say, become lazy, right? A good example in clarity is something like cost plans or allocations, right? If it takes you a couple hours to update your allocations, the odds are that you don't do it very often, because it's very time consuming, very tedious, right? And if you don't do it very often, then it's not very accurate, right? But BI tools are meant to deliver tremendous data processing, presentation, and analytic capabilities, right? However, if you feed garbage data to the system, all you're going to get is neat sounding garbage, right? The old garbage in, garbage out. And I have a good example of this. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Waze. So Waze is, for those of you that haven't used it, it's like a GPS tool for driving, but it contains traffic and other driving information that's really populated by end users, right? The issue is the source of the data, right? Since the source of the data for Waze is end users, there's no way for the application to validate the input from the end users, right? So it uses algorithms to calculate the validity based on how many people are entering that data or not, to see if it's correct or not. But somebody might say there's an accident here, right, which causes everyone else to drive a different route. Well, that might not necessarily be a true fact, right? So you end up making decisions based on invalid input because there's no way for you to validate it, right? And this is really one of a common scenario that happens in BI. Obviously, I'm explaining it at the end user level, not quite at the corporate level. And the last but not least is the Babble effect, right? So the Babble effect by definition is like a confused mixture of sounds, voices, or languages, right? Congruent BI dashboards must be clean and concise to ensure that the Babble effect is not generated to the end users, as this causes poor adoption of the tools, right? And when the Babble effect occurs, right, then errors are common and decisions are usually flawed and not based on true analytics or facts. I'm just gonna cover one scenario that we did for a client. Actually, we just finished the implementation a couple of weeks ago, where they used a mixture of different tool sets to present the data in one, which I thought was a very genuine way to extract the data. So we used a mixture of BCS. So we presented it all in SharePoint, and we used a mixture of BCS. So BCS is Business Connectivity Services from SharePoint. And we used EasyBoss, which is our own proprietary tool that extracts data from SharePoint. And we use Power BI. So this is a Microsoft shop, right? And that's why we utilized all Microsoft tool sets. But what we did is we utilized one screen to be able to present different screen sets or different shows within inside of one location. So across from one screen, you could show projects from CAPPM, you could show issues and tasks that were associated to it from Jira in that same screen, your SAP financials, as well as ServiceNow incidents that were associated with that particular project. So all we did in the solution was we integrated the system IDs, right? So we integrated the system IDs of the projects to all of the systems, right? So instead of integrating all of the data, right, we just integrated the primary keys, and we utilized those primary keys to display the data within inside of one screen, right? So that avoided us having to build a star schema or a data warehouse to be able to display that data throughout Power BI, right? So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to see if anyone has any questions. And actually, I see a couple of comments here. Let me just open up my question box here. All right, so there's just a couple of people that have that put notes. So initially, when I asked people how what platform they're using or what solution they're using, right? I got one here that is starting to utilize Tableau. They say they are improving. Another one is saying that they are utilizing Jaspersoft reporting, although they're having some serious issues with the data warehouse. I see another one that's utilizing Power BI with the OData connector from CA. So I guess they're on a relatively newer version of CA PPM. All right. And then I'm getting got another question here that says, what type of information could be vital in PPM inside of a BI, right? Well, I would say that keep in mind a lot of the BI solutions are based around analytics, right? So whenever we're talking about analytics, right, is what do executives like to see, right? So what do they like to see? Are we being efficient? Are we in budget? How much money is it costing? How much money are we spending, right? So usually those particular questions are boiled around, right, the financials of the project and the resources and resource assignments, right? Those are the heaviest costs for projects, right? The next one is, what are the security for data to be able to automate integrations in our systems? Wow, whenever you're integrating multiple tool sets, right, the security component becomes very difficult. And this was one of the main reasons why we implemented on the previous slide where I showed we implemented the component within inside of SharePoint, is because we utilized web services to extract the data from the different tool sets, and we passed the security parameters in flight via the web service calls. So instead of maintaining the security parameters inside of the data warehouse, we're able to utilize the out-of-the-box functionality of each of the platforms to keep the security, right? And we do that because we're utilizing web services to extract the data from the transactional database. Now, I don't have any other questions, and this brings us to the half an hour that we had scheduled for this particular webinar. So I want to thank everyone for attending, and I appreciate your time. And if anyone has anything else, please feel free to reach out to me. You can either call me or send me an email. You can either send them at sales@itroisolutions.com or fpenna@itroi solutions. And if you have any concerns, I'll gladly help you guys out. I want to thank you guys once again, and I appreciate your time. Bye.